Hello, Heron. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm going to ask you just to start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about how you became an expert on bisexuality.
My pleasure, Tanya, and thank you for having me. My name is Heron Greenesmith. I work at Political Research Associates, where I'm the senior research analyst for LGBTQI justice, which means that I research and analyze and monitor anti-LGBT movements with an emphasis on movements that attack trans justice and trans lives, and then with a even stronger, more narrow emphasis on anti-trans feminists and anti-sex work feminists and conversion therapy and people who would advocate against legal recognition for multi-partner and multi-parent families. How I became an expert on bisexuality is I am a bi person and we are all experts on our own sexuality. And I am a policy attorney. So my strength and my expertise lie in analyzing public policy and how it impacts the lives of the people whom it regulates. I was working at the Movement Advancement Project, which is a really incredible organization that analyzes public policy. And I realized that there was a real dearth of information out there on how public policy impacts bi folks. So along with attending 3 White House events with you, I collected our advocacy recommendations to the White House together into a document called Invisible Majority. I can't actually remember the subtitle, but it's hardly important. LGBTmap.org, look up policy.
It's so good. It's such
population.
A good piece. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. And it's informed by experts like you. And my co-authors with that were Dr. Harukuti from New York. Please check him out. Incredible playwright and author and advocate. And Dr. Lauren Beach, who is currently, I believe, at the University of Northwestern University, right?
Yes, I think so.
She's also incredible. Mm-hmm. And from those conversations and those reports arose other reports and other conversations, and just kind of a deeper understanding that we really needed some loud voices out there talking not just about, like the stereotypes that bi people face, and the lives of bi people, but really how public policy impacts the largest percentage of the lesbian, gay, and bi population. As you know, we're more than half of US LGBT adults, and by some measures, multitudes more adults have experienced attraction to more than one gender or have had a sexual contact with more than one gender. And just making sure that those disparities were clearly written, impacts that the law has upon our disparities in our populations were clearly articulated, and then that we had clearly articulated recommendations for how to remedy the disparities through public policy. And to that end, I actually have a chapter, an update of the Invisible Majority Report in, I think it's 2019's Rutledge Handbook on LGBT Administration and Public Policy. So hopefully to help people kind of understand the broad impacts of public policy facing bi people. And that's me.
Oh, you are so awesome. You have such not only a wealth of expertise, but just a wealth of resources that you offer through your work. I always turn to look and see, like, what have you done? What are you offering up? You also have just a fabulous social media presence. I feel like the energy and goodness that you put out there into the world and the information and perspective is so great. Okay, I should probably ask this at the end, but I'll just ask now, like, how can people follow you?
Oh, you can follow me. No, don't follow me everywhere because my TikTok isn't great right now, but you can follow me on Twitter where I am Heron G. I pronounce it Heron, but I recently realized that no one knows that I pronounce it Heron. It's Heron G. And then if you do want to, you can find my others, but please, my Twitter is where I feel most comfortable as a early millennial, talking about complicating queerness and complicating the conversations around public policy and bisexuality and non-binary identities.
And also, like, how to send people burritos when they need them, which you just create community and support. You're fantastic.
Thank you. Do you need a burrito?
No, I'm good. But
Because I
thank
can use
you.
a burrito right now. Send me a burrito, anyone out there.
Yes, I know. Send Heron a burrito. So I love that you're doing policy work, because one of the things we're talking about in the class is structural stigma. And so, how all of those things, because my work as a psychologist is a little bit more interpersonal. And so when we think about on a policy level, can you talk about what kinds of policies do you see disproportionately affecting bisexual people
Yeah,
or negatively affecting bisexual people?
I think that's a great question. And I do want to, like, because it's my job to complicate things, I teach law, and in my law class, I kind of have a joke that, like, the goal at the end of the law class is that you won't believe in the law anymore. But I really want my students and all of our students to understand that, like gender and sexual orientation, the law is also a construct. We created the law. And so, everything, all constructs have flaws that reflect the people who created the constructs. And in the United States, that means that our laws reflect those, the founders, the white slave holding, kidnapping, Christian, although some of them, were slightly more liberal with their understanding of Christianity than others, but Christian men, landholders, who wrote the Constitution. And then our law also reflects everyone for the past 250, 60, 70 years who have interpreted those laws. Coming to today, when we still have a notion of rights versus justice. And what I mean by that is, in the United States, in order to show that you have been harmed by a law, you have to indicate that you are part of a population who is consistently harmed by the law, instead of a justice-based approach, which would say, we in America believe that everyone deserves a bed to sleep in. Who doesn't have a bed? How can we make sure those people have beds? Instead, we ask people who don't have beds to indicate that they don't have beds because of something about them. And so, putting the onus upon a disproportionately impacted community to prove that they deserve these rights has disproportionate impacts on communities with the least power, which is ironically exactly whom we say, you should have to advocate for yourself. So moving this towards bi people, we've had a movement, since the 70s to indicate that LGBT people are people who deserve special protections, against discrimination on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity in American law. And when I say special protections, I don't mean protections greater than anyone else in the United States. I mean, they deserve protections from the special discrimination that we face based on our sexual orientation and gender identity. That's what I mean by special. Mm-hmm. And exactly like the construction of the law, the request for protections is shaped by those who have the most power. So while it was Black and brown trans women who started the riots, not just at Stonewall, but across the country in the 70s, it became those who had more proximity to power, white gay men, white lesbian women, some white bi men and women, who got to own what that construction of those protections looked like. And you can directly draw the line between, Marsha P. Johnson in 1969, to if Marsha P. Johnson was alive today, and there are women like Marsha P. Johnson alive today who experience the same oppressions and the same discrimination that Marsha Johnson faced back then. Bi people, we live at this incredible fertile intersection of non-monosexuality, in which we complicate and we lay bare many people's fears and desires. And we have been demanding this, seat at the table, but also building our own tables, and like bringing seats to tables since 1969, since Brenda Howard in 1970 had the first Christopher Street Pride that became our national pride marches every June. And yet continually, because we do not hold the majority of the power in those spaces because of structural racism, structural white supremacy, we continue to not be able to experience the benefits that those protections should give us.
Right.
That was very abject. Do you want some specifics?
Yeah. First of all, let me say that was fabulous. That was amazing. I love that perspective on how we think about public policy and the law and rights and justice. I love that. One of the points that I'm always trying to make, and so I'm curious about what you think about this, is that if we center bisexuality, then we actually, and honestly, if we center the most marginalized, if we center, BIPOC people, if we center bisexuality, if we center people with disabilities, then actually we're meeting everyone's needs. So so that's part of what I think. Like, if we have policies that work for people who are bisexual, they're going to work for people who are heterosexual, who are lesbian or gay, the whole spectrum of folks, I think. So curious about what you think of that. And I would love some more specifics.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I have a picture of, I believe her name is Roxana Hernandez, one of the trans women to die in custody, in ICE custody, on my cubicle back at my office, which might as well not exist anymore, to remind me to center people who are undocumented, brown and Black people, trans women, at the center of my own advocacy, because I think you're exactly right. In my mind, we all have the potential, and all will in our lives at some point have a disability, in the sense that we will not be able to interact with the world as it was created for abled people of a specific ability. Mostly, we all get old.
If we're lucky.
If we're lucky, we will get old. And, so if we create a world that works for people of all different abilities, then everyone will benefit. If we create a world in which all religions are respected, and we emphasize diversity and populism and multiculturalism over monotheism, and I don't mean that in the sense of believing in one God, but more like a single theology, then when people convert to other religions, it won't matter what their religion is, because they'll still be protected. And I believe the same thing about sexual orientation and gender identity. We both know people who have come out as trans or gender nonconforming later in their lives. I came out as agender when I was 37 years old. And hopefully I had worked on creating a world that is, just for non-binary people, because as I came into my non-binariness, like, I hope my past self didn't discriminate against me. My point is, we are creating the world for all of the possibilities that we could be ourselves. And when we center bi people, trans people, undocumented people, we could at any point in our lives have to flee an oppressive regime in order to gain justice. We could all be undocumented. And to say that there's no realm in which we could be undocumented or have a disability or be a sexual gender minority or be a religious minority is completely untrue. There are stories of that every day. So when we center the people who are marginalized by our systems, we support all of us. I completely agree with you.
Awesome. All right. Give me some ideas of particular policy things that you see and how they affect bisexual people.
I have a particular fondness for, policies that impact mental health, because we know that bi folks, with the discrimination and the microaggressions, and the structural oppression that bi folks face, that our mental health suffers incredibly. And then on top of that, we know that one of the structures, the oppressive structures, is the complete lack of services for bi folks, which compounds the mental health disparities. So the thing is, there are pretty simple ways to start to remedy. And I say start because there really aren't that many supports for bi folks out there, especially by young people. Designate bi people as a population of a specific need. There are so many grants out there that say, like, and if your grant is dedicated to a population, that we have designated a population of interest, then we'll prioritize your grant. You give bi folks priority access, grants supporting bi folks' mental health will come through. There are bi people out there who are supporting mental health. There are people who are researching it and who are providing services, but they lack resources. So we need to start. That's a great way to start from the top down. Just in your city, town, federal agency, whatever, just say, hey, we have a commitment to supporting bi health. So we're going to designate the bi population as a population of whatever specific need.
Mm-hmm.
Second, area of particular interest to me is the level of violence that bi people face. We know that 47% of bi women report having been raped in their lives, and many of them between the ages of, I think, 11 and 17. Far more bi young women experienced, I'm sorry, the language, I'm just going to give a content note. The language of this is really disgusting. It's their first completed rape at a statistically younger age than other women, meaning lesbian women and straight identified women. Mm-hmm. And what that tells me is there is something particularly vulnerable about bi young women of all gender identities. Mm-hmm. And that we need to expand the conversation around anti-violence, to talk about comprehensive sexual education, to talk about, to talk to young bi kids about other people who will sexualize them, and understanding that that's not our problem as bi people when we are sexualized. That is white supremacy and Christian supremacy imposing upon us specific requirements and restrictions that are impossible to achieve. And so, I think a great way to attack the violence through public policy is at the school level, mandate comprehensive sexual education. We have a real problem of poor sex education in the United States, and the Christian right and organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom and the Family Policy Alliance and the Family Research Council are concentrating many of their efforts on attacking comprehensive sexual education. Their message is, talking about sex endangers children. The opposite is true. When we don't talk about sex, children do not have the vocabulary to talk about their own bodies and their own autonomy and their own safety. Mm-hmm. And those three things are absolutely necessary for bi people. Yeah. And then the third thing is poverty. Half of bi households live on a total income of $30,000 a year. And let's be clear, that is twice the income of minimum wage in the United States. Minimum wage, if you work 40 hours a week, I think nets you $17,000 a year. So this is not just a condemnation of biphobia. This is a condemnation of capitalism and a condemnation, a pure public policy failure in general, which leads me to say that a $20 minimum wage would help bi people. So many bi people would be helped. If you say that $30,000 a year income is a 2 minimum wage job holding household, double the minimum wage, you've lifted a bi family out of poverty. And public policy doesn't need to be bi specific to help bi people.
And I think that's such a great point that you're making is you've got this lens of, prioritizing, paying attention to the needs of bisexual people. But when you use that lens to look at public policy and to look at problems in our society and the remedies you're talking about, they lift everyone. Addressing sexual violence that's not only going to help bi people, but it's going to help bi people disproportionately because bi people are affected by that disproportionately. So
Yes.
yeah, that's great. It really does identify some of the greatest vulnerabilities in our society that disproportionately affect bisexual people, but affect so many other people too. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Wow. That's amazing. Is there anything else that you would want to make sure people know about structural stigma and policy issues as they affect bi folks?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot in my work, talking about anti-trans feminists specifically, and kind of thinking about, just the infectiousness of white supremacy. I've been thinking a lot about how the left, just kind of the left writ large, really lacks a cogent narrative around sexual and gender fluidity. Um,
Mm.
and that allows the right to dominate the conversation around fluidity. And that domination of the conversation allows the right to say, look, if sexual orientation and gender are fluid, like science is showing, then shouldn't we be allowed to let people choose to be straight or choose to be cis? And that conversation lets conversion therapy proliferate because the left doesn't have a good retort to say, absolutely, sexual orientation and gender identity are fluid. That does not mean you can force someone to adhere to a specific way at a specific point in their life.
Right.
And then secondarily, the right is using that fluidity in order to say that sexual orientation and gender identity are not actually protected classes. Because if they're fluid, that means, according to the right, that they're not immutable. And immutability is key for gaining protection and rights in the United States legal constructs. So I've been just thinking a lot about how we as the left can really not reclaim, because I don't think we need to reclaim anything, but just like talk much more openly about how important fluidity is across lives and how about every identity is fluid. Ability is fluid across time. Income and is fluid across time. Religion is fluid across time. We have these understandings. Theoretically, I think some people think that fluidity is only fluid, in the sense that we're all temporarily embarrassed millionaires. We all have this we all have this uphill climb. In fact, that's not true at all. And many people experience poverty and fall into homelessness. But somehow we allow ourselves to be fluid in many ways. And in other ways, like ability and sexual orientation and gender identity, we really ignore that we're all gonna face a time when we need accessibility devices and aids. And it's gonna be a time in which maybe some of us will realize we are a sexual orientation or a gender identity minority. And we better have a narrative ready for when that happens. And when we come out, when we're 75 and realize, oops, I'm really fucking queer. Oh, too bad I hated on queer people my whole life and supported policies that don't support queer people. So I've been thinking a lot about that. Fluidity is awesome.
Oh, that's so great because I think that people struggle with like, how do we talk about fluidity? How do we think about fluidity? How do we justify ourselves when one of the allegations made against bisexual people is it's just a transitional identity?
Yep.
Then and it fluidity is only a problem when we're within this context of heterosexism and monosexism that
Yes.
sort of imagines that it's that bisexuality doesn't truly exist. And
Yes.
so if we could just get rid of those problems, then I feel like it would be so much easier for us to embrace fluidity.
Absolutely. Let's just get rid of heterosexism. I think that's exactly what we should do. I'm on
Okay,
board.
right on. We're working on it together. That's
That's
great.
good.
Thank you so much, Heron.
Thank you, Tanya.
You are amazing. You are brilliant, and really more than anything, thank you for the work that you do. You are just so dedicated to the causes and people who I feel like we most need to support, and I have just tons of appreciation.
Thank you so much. I love working with you and I love being in community with you.